Would you believe that negotiating a 15-year, $765 million contract for Juan Soto was easier than getting a deal done for a homegrown star? Steve Cohen said as much today, and his comments led to some pushback from Scott Boras. We're going to talk about the latest in the Pete Alonso soap opera on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Well, Saturday was, as it was branded to be, an amazing day for the New York Mets. Their fan fest looked incredible. I had some real FOMO watching all these different great former Mets and current Mets walking around, rubbing shoulders with fans. You see the new road jerseys were revealed. The blue jerseys looked great. I know some people might not like it, but I had no issues with them. And you saw just so much offered to a Mets fan base that is clearly in love with this team and everything going on right now. Juan Soto was not there because his flight couldn't make it from the Dominican Republic, but Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, Sean Manaea, Jesse Winker, all these different players, Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, all these guys from last year's team were there. The current players, you saw players from 86. You saw Mike Piazza and David Wright there with their respective teams from their eras of Mets baseball. There was panels going on throughout where you were hearing from all these different players from the past, the present, even the future. Ronnie Mauricio, Ryan Clifford, Christian Scott, the top prospects being in the building. It was an amazing day, again, as it was branded to be. And then they went to a Knicks game for a team event at Madison Square Garden. There was the BBWAA award ceremony the same night as well, where Sean Manaea got the Good Guy Award. The 2024 OMG Mets got the Toast of the Town Award. Nothing but celebration for what the Mets just were and what they hope to become. And yet, in every single room, there was one man missing. And everybody was getting asked about it. You want Pete Alonso back? And every single teammate loves Pete, wants Pete back. And then it got to the point where David Stearns, Carlos Mendoza, and Steve Cohen were on the stage for a panel led by Gary Cohen. And Gary asked the question that everyone wanted to know. He asked about the elephant in the room. David Stearns put on his executive hat, his politically correct hat. I'm going to say exactly the right thing. He talked about how much the Mets love Pete Alonso. He talked about how Pete is exploring free agency as every player has the right to do. And then he went on to reference how the Mets like their young players, and they have a lot of them coming up, and they are comfortable with where they're at. And throughout this process, David Stearns is getting a smattering of boos, especially when he brought up the young players. He was getting a lot of boos. And Steve Cohen stepped in. He steps in to quiet the boos down, and the boos turn into a "We Want Pete" chant. Pete Alonso, all of that stuff, as the fans are doing what you expected them. Although I would say, fans, I get it. I get New York fans are going to boo, but to boo David Stearns and Steve Cohen after what they did last year and what they are in line to do moving forward, it's not the best of looks, but it is what it is. Fans are going to fan. And Steve Cohen, in about 90 seconds, turned boos into cheers in a clip that has gone completely viral and one that we had to talk about. So I want to play that clip for you all just in case you haven't heard it yet. Here's what Steve Cohen had to say to the fans about Pete Alonso.
We've made a significant offer to Pete. What Davis said is correct. He's entitled to go out and explore his market. And that's what he's doing. Personally, this has been an exhausting conversation and negotiation. I mean, Soto was tough. This is worse. Okay? And A lot of it is, we've made a significant. I don't like the structures that are being presented back to us. I think it's highly asymmetric against us, and I feel strongly about it. And so, I will never say no. There's always the possibility. But the reality is, we're moving forward, and we continue to bring in players. As we continue to bring in players, the reality is, it becomes harder to fit Pete into what is a very expensive, group of players that we already have, and that's where we are. And I'm being brutally honest. I don't like the negotiations. I don't like what's been presented to us. Listen, maybe that changes, and certainly, I'll always stay flexible. If it stays this way, I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that, we may have to go forward and with the existing players that we have.
So, first of all, this guy's exhausted by months and months of negotiating with Scott Boras. And for anybody that thought that Stearns, and I've been one that has been kind of expressing my opinion that I thought David Stearns was really leading these talks. I mean, Steve Cohen's letting us know that this isn't just David Stearns completely running the negotiations. I'm sure that Steve Cohen is operating based on David Stearns' intelligence, his advice on what the Mets should do. And he does delegate in that way. But Steve Cohen's in these conversations, or he's at least in the loop of these conversations, and he's sick of them. He's sick of Scott Boras. You got to remember, to get Juan Soto, it was a silent auction as if Juan Soto was a piece of fine art. And it worked. He got multiple teams to go over $700 million. It was an incredible feat as an agent to get that contract, to get a contract in present day value with no deferred money that was $300 million more than Shohei Ohtani. Insane. And I wrote a whole article about this, and I'm going to talk about my article in the final segment today because I think there is a clear issue with the way Scott Boras operates for a specific segment of players. And Pete Alonso falls into that segment. So we'll get into that to close out the show. But Steve Cohen is telling you, like, look, we gave what we think is a fair offer to Pete Alonso. And I also get into the next segment. Once you get Scott Boras' rebuttal, I'm starting to be able to read some of these tea leaves on exactly where these negotiations broke down. But he believes that they have a fair offer to Pete Alonso. And remember, sure, Pete might be meeting with the Angels this week. The Blue Jays might be interested. But ultimately, this is a player that has not had any market throughout this entire offseason. This is not Juan Soto that has had a list of teams putting in silent bids to try to get his services. This is a free agent where everybody in the industry expects him to go to this one team to return to the Mets. And the Mets gave him a contract that was the same years as what Christian Walker got, that by present day value was $10 million more, that had opt-outs after each year. And now, as we'll get into more in the next segment, probably had a significant amount of deferred money in it as well. That would have probably got closer to what Scott Boras and Pete Alonso wanted on a straight deal. So you put it all together, and yeah, the Mets might have to stick with the youth because Steve Cohen is not going to bend here. Neither is David Stearns, surely. They have put together an offer for a player that does not have another offer to stand on, and a player that wants to be with the Mets. Everybody wants this reunion to happen. And Scott Boras is doing his job the way he always has, but I believe the way he has done his job previously does not work for a player like Pete Alonso. But we got a response from Scott Boras to what Steve Cohen said. And I also, before we get to the response into the next segment, I want to say, you got to love Steve Cohen for being candid, because at a time where you have so many owners that don't even talk to the media at all, that aren't spending, that are hiding in their executive suite, you at least have this guy that is creating an incredible experience for his fans. If you look at everything going on that day, that is what Steve Cohen has built now in 5 years with the Mets, going into year 5. that this franchise is becoming one of the most respected in baseball that is doing things the right way. So for him to have this infrastructure in place, he's got the executive that he wants, he's got the manager that he wants, and he's got one of the best players in the sport that he just landed. For him to come out, face the fans, hear some boos, and turn those boos into cheers by being candid, it shows you that if Pete Alonso walks, the guy that's going to get the blame is Scott Boras and then Pete Alonso, and the Mets are not going to see a huge amount of blowback from the fan base. I really don't think so. But Scott Boras still thinks it's a fair offer, and he told The Athletic as much. What exactly did he say? I'm going to break that down in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, theater events near you. And Game Time Picks is going to make it easier to get tickets for a favorite live event. Game Time Picks is going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can also view your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They have all-in pricing, so you can click that feature and you won't be surprised when you get to checkout when the fees hit. Also, you can look, and with Game Time, you can get tickets up to an hour after the event starts. This is the place to go to get your tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. So there was a response by Scott Boras in The Athletic. He was quoted directly by Will Salmon in this piece. I want to read the quote first, but then I want to get into some things that was said or that was written before the quote, where we can start to put together exactly what happened here with Pete Alonso and the New York Mets. So here's what Boras said. Pete's free agent contract structure requests are identical to the standards and practices of other clubs who have signed similarly situated qualifying offer all-star level players. Nothing different, just established fairness standards. So he's saying, look, if you're going to sign one of my all-star players who has a qualifying offer, and that's why he doesn't have a market, you're going to sign into a 3-year deal with opt-outs, and I'm going to set a price, and you're going to pay that price. Nothing's different, just established fairness standards. Cody Bellinger, that was the contract that we put forward, got a deal done. Matt Chapman, same thing. But then if you read the paragraph before you get to the quote from Scott Boras, Will Salmon has a little bit of conjecture in here that actually tells you exactly what happened. At least, I shouldn't say that completely wholeheartedly. This is 100% what happened. But I've been covering the New York Mets since 2019. I have done, I think, well over 1,500 podcasts now, and every single day following how people move in the media. And I think we're starting to be able to put the pieces together. So here's what Will Salmon writes. Generally, from a star player's perspective, a short-term deal can be seen as a concession. Therefore, for 3 years, there might be a preference from the player side to have only player opt-outs and no deferred money. In Boras's 4 shorter-term deals after the 2023 season, none included deferred money. On the other hand, from the team's perspective, they may prefer more optionality on their side. So what does all that mean? The first part of that is clearly coming from Scott Boras. Hey, if he's getting a 3-year deal, there's got to be some concession. So what are they talking about here? Well, the concession is, hey, he's going to get opt-outs because it's only a 3-year deal for Pete Alonso, who's 30 years old, who's a multi-time All-Star, who's on a historic home run pace. It's a 3-year deal, opt-outs, no deferred money. And honestly, I can sort of wrap my head around that a little bit. The ask, though, has to be fair. And so the question is, what was the ask from the Boras side? Where are the Mets willing to go, and how are they willing to get there? Steve Cohen talks about it being asymmetric. It's only good for Pete, not good for us. And Boras' 4 shorter-term deals, none include deferred money. Well, but on the other hand, from a team's perspective, they prefer more optionality on their side. So now we can really start to put the pieces together because Andy Martino said on SNY that he's hearing there was deferred money in that deal, but he didn't want to get to the specifics. When it came to the range that was reported by Joel Sherman, the offer was $68 to $70 million. How do you get to that kind of a range? Deferred money contracts require knowing interest levels, what years are the money deferred, when are they deferred, how's it deferred, how does the bank see it, how do we calculate the present day value? There's usually a range. So now it starts to make sense. Let's just say $90 million was the ask. Or maybe the ask really was setting the market for first baseman and it was whatever that number was to beat Miggy, whether it was the 93.2 or whatever it was, right? They wanted to beat Miguel Cabrera on average annual value. Let's say that's what it was. We really don't know. But somewhere in the $90 million range is what the Boras side asked of the New York Mets. The Mets say, we're not going to pay that. We don't want Pete Alonso to cost $61 million. And for those of you who missed it, I talked about it last week. I did a show where I talked about the Mets being on a budget. If you want to, are they on a budget or are they bluffing? It was something along those lines, what I titled it as. And I really broke down the luxury tax, as in depth as I could. So I'm not going to go through it all. But the bottom line here is the New York Mets are in a position where they are a repeat tax offender. They have cleared everything but the Steve Cohen tax line. And if they did by signing Pete Alonso to a $30 million deal in 2025, and that's what the average annual value came out as, Pete Alonso would cost the New York Mets $61 million because you pretty much have to double the contract when it comes to the fees that Steve Cohen has to pay that don't go to the Mets. They go to Major League Baseball to do whatever they want with it. And that's why deferred money contracts have gotten so popular. That's why the Dodgers are manipulating it with Shohei Ohtani and every other free agent they have, because they are lowering their tax bill so they don't have to give the league as much. They get to keep a little more of their money. So if you're Steve Cohen and the ask is $90-something million or whatever it is, and David Stearns puts in front of you fair market value for Pete Alonso is $70 million over 3 years. How do you bridge that gap on $20 million? You defer money. But Scott Boras is telling Pete Alonso, we don't want to do that. You want your money in your hand now. You don't want deferred money. Now, granted, it's funny because they said, now that I think about it, Blake Snell did have some weird money going on there. So it is actually a little funny. And now that I'm thinking about it, in the 4 shorter-term deals after the 2023 season, not include deferred money, yeah, you know what? That's actually a little bit of creativity by Scott Boras because Blake Snell's deal absolutely did include like a late signing bonus and a lot of weird maneuvering. But whatever it is, they haven't come to terms. That's what this probably is all about. The Mets want Pete Alonso's luxury tax hit to be that number. Scott Boras is telling Pete, hey, if you're only taking 3 years, screw that. We want all the money up front. And I think, and this is just, again, my opinion, but my guess here is Pete Alonso has been instructed by Brandon Nimmo, Max Scherzer, other Scott Boras clients, maybe even Sean Manaea. Scott handles the contract. Don't worry about it. He'll get it done. How active is Pete Alonso in these talks? Or is Pete Alonso in Tampa working out, getting ready for the season, just hoping he comes back to the Mets? Pete almost has to take charge of this situation, and I don't know if he has it in him to do it, but quite frankly, Pete Alonso would be a hero if he just took the Mets offer and fired Scott Boras. He would be renowned. But at the same time, if you're Pete Alonso and 16 months ago, or whatever it was, Steve Cohen was ready to hand you a check for $158 million. And now, because of circumstances, which is for one, you didn't put up and play well. You can't ignore that. Yes, Pete was amazing in the playoffs, had some huge home runs, but for a large portion of 2023 and 2024, he did not play up to his past standards that Scott Boras is trying to get him paid out on. So he deserves some responsibility in that. But still, the ego side of it, the fact that you are going to be offered double what the Mets have on the table right now, and then some. And yes, it was a contract that was twice as long. But Pete's probably wondering right now, well, where's my 6-year deal? And so I can see both sides of it. I really can. I can see the Mets side of it. I can see Pete's side of it. And honestly, I wish the Mets would just give him more years. I wish they would budge more on the years. I'm not saying give him 7 years. I'm not even necessarily saying give him 6 years. But can you look at what Anthony Santander just got, which was a ridiculously deferred contract? And the Mets wouldn't even have to go to that level. They don't need to get that AAV down to 13 million or 13.7. They just need to get the AAV down to, 22 million. Can they come to terms on a deal? And can they say, hey, you know what? We're going to throw you a 5-year deal and we're going to put an opt-out after the 3rd year. And you know what? Maybe they have. Maybe they have given a contract that is longer, and Scott Boras is rebuffing that as well. We really don't know. Scott Boras might be dead set on, okay, if it's a 5-year deal, we want to opt out after the 1st year. The Mets might be saying, no, if it's a 5-year deal, we want to opt out after the 3rd year. Because if we're going to go to 5 years, we want 3 years of Pete Alonso for sure at the price that we want. So ultimately, I think there are multiple factors that are playing into the situation, and the people that get hurt by it, namely Pete Alonso, and a fan base that largely wants Pete back. And I know there's some fans that are tired of this. They're saying, screw Pete, let him go. And I get it. But I think the two things that are holding this up the most, it's Scott Boras being unrealistic, and it's also David Stearns being firm on the years. David Stearns potentially saying only 3 years, or going with that strategy the Mets employ of saying, hey, go get us a deal and we will talk. Like, provide us market value. And if you can't provide us market value with a concrete offer from another team, then there is no one else bidding, and we're bidding against ourselves. So we want to go 3 years for Pete. And that's where you get all of this. I still feel like a reunion should happen, but the more that you hear each side digging their heels in, the more you have to understand that it just might not happen. And the Mets might roll with what they got. And I don't think that's the worst outcome. I want to talk about that a little bit, but I also want to get into my article for Just Baseball that I wrote about this situation, because I do think that Scott Boras, while he has he's the GOAT of player agents. No one's been better. And he still has his fastball, so to speak, with certain clients, but he has a blind spot, and it's massive, and it's going to keep growing. And I would hope a certain segment of players are wise to it, and they change agencies, and they don't end up in an uncomfortable situation like the one Pete Alonso's in, and the one that Alex Bregman's in right now. I'm going to talk about that all in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so first and foremost, we'll get to the young player side of it after this, because I thought it was interesting seeing Brett Beatty there today, and I want to touch on it briefly. But I wrote this article for Just Baseball, and it was about Scott Boras. You can find it by just Googling Scott Boras' name. You'll see it pretty prominently featured there. Does Scott Boras only win free agency when dealt a great hand? And I'll throw the link of this in the episode description in case you want to read it. But Scott Boras is in a point now in his career where he's not seeing the market clearly for a certain segment of player. You have Juan Soto or Blake Snell, guys that have a healthy market, guys that are proven. He's able to get that deal and get big money on whatever deal that is. He's able to, when a player has a healthy market, Scott Boras' job's easy. You have multiple teams that are saying the biggest and best thing we can do this offseason is sign Juan Soto, or the Dodgers say, screw it, we got all this money, we don't care. We want Blake Snell. What's your price? Can we structure it this way? Okay, cool, boom, boom, done. That's easy. That's easy money for Scott Boras. But we've also seen him be proactive and get deals done in a more timely fashion for the free agents that aren't stars. Tyler O'Neill, Jurickson Profar, Frankie Montas, Sean Manaea. These guys who don't have the cachet of a Pete Alonso or an Alex Bregman, who don't have the lengthy resumes, particularly with one team. Those guys, that's his blind spot. And if you look at the previous offseason, who are the guys that he struggled with? Matt Chapman, guy with gold gloves, a lot of hardware. Blake Snell, reigning Cy Young. Jordan Montgomery, postseason hero. Won a World Series. JD Martinez, that was just a lack of market. I always forget the fourth one. Who am I missing? Bellinger. Bellinger had a huge season. Former MVP, Cody Bellinger. It's that type of player that Scott Boras has lost his touch on. He doesn't get it. He doesn't. He still thinks they should be paid in the same class as your Juan Sotos. And not to 15 years in that unique circumstance. But Pete Alonso is the best first baseman on the market, should set the price for first baseman. Alex Bregman, as the best third baseman on the market, should set the price for third baseman. And he has turned down some really fair deals, particularly Alex Bregman. The Astros are trying to get back in on Bregman. They're saying, we have a fair offer out there, or we had a fair offer out there. We'd like you to take it. You haven't gotten a deal done with anyone else. Why don't you come back in with us? Get a deal done. You know what? It is fair. Because guess what? Matt Chapman, who is right on line with Alex Bregman. I know for just baseball, we ranked Matt Chapman in our top 10 third baseman over Alex Bregman. Similar ages, same position, similar ability, both defensively and offensively. I think Chapman's better defensively, but hey, did they both win Gold Gloves this year? I think they might have. Matt Chapman got 6 years, $151 million on the extension. Tell me why the Astros offer of 6 years, $156 million is not fair. I'm sorry, it is. To me, that's the frustrating part. It really is. Because you now have some players that are getting screwed, that are getting their names dragged through the mud, that are getting fan bases who are turning on them after they've built a ton of goodwill, particularly for Pete, but I'm not as plugged into Astros fans, but it's that level of player that Scott Boras has lost his touch on. And you could say I'm wrong. You say he's amazing at his job. He's got this incredible track record. Yes, he has. But the game is not valuing the players that he is still putting on a pedestal. And when you put those players on a pedestal and tell them they deserve X, Y, and Z, if the team that they have put their blood, sweat, and tears in, and for Alex Bregman's case, won championships for Pete Alonso, the team he's been the face of for 6 years, now they start to resent their former team. Because that's the guy that's in their ear. And it's just, it's a really frustrating, as Steve Cohen said, it's an exhausting experience. One note that I'm just realizing I forgot to mention in the last segment. Part of the story from Will Salmon of The Athletic. He says, last week the Mets made a counteroffer of 3 years to Alonso and Boras. It was rejected. This is just another interesting tidbit that I had to mention. The Mets withdrew that specific offer after it was turned down. Sources familiar with the matter said. Sources familiar is Scott Boras. Just telling you. However, it is unknown if the Mets and Alonso have since re-engaged. So whether the doors open under similar or different parameters remains a question. I think there's a world where, I don't even think there's a world. I would imagine that Pete Alonso had the same FOMO that I did watching the Fan Fest. Watching all of his buddies at Citi Field, celebrating last year, getting ready for next year. Pitchers and catchers, I mean, a lot of guys are already reporting. Guys report earlier than ever. Carlos Mendoza said today that Clay Holmes reported like in the middle of January. So, you have all these guys who are gearing up for spring training, and Pete doesn't have a job right now. I think he still wants to go back to the Mets. So if the Blue Jays step up and put a 5-year offer on the table with a ton of deferred money, and that's the best offer he got, are they going to float that to the Mets? And if so, are the Mets going to dig their heels on the 5 years? Are they going to say, all right, the market said this. Do we want Pete Alonso or do we not want Pete Alonso? And we'll see. If there's a team that comes over the top and meets that price of the $90 million and the opt-outs after each year, then Pete's going to play for that team. So it just depends on what these other teams do. And hopefully at some point, they just get into a room with the intent of getting a deal done. And Scott Boras needs to come down a little bit on this idea that, there can't be any deferred money. Well, you know what part of that is? Scott Boras doesn't get paid until that deferred money hits. So how old is Scott Boras? I'm just curious. I wonder if this plays into it. Scott Boras is 72. He's got all the money in the world. He shouldn't care. But if they defer the money, fit 10 years down the line, now he's 82. Is that an issue on this one? Who knows? But he's got to understand the specific circumstances the Mets are in. And if you're Steve Cohen, I guess we're not talking about the young players. To me, I was just going to say, as far as the young players are concerned, you see Brett Beatty, and it's hard not to root for him when he's talking to the media. And I hope that Beatty, Mauricio, those guys are there. Even Ryan Clifford. These are future players at the corner infield positions. I think if you have to turn to the future now, it's not the worst thing. You see what you have and you roll. But again, getting to this idea of where Steve Cohen's at, imagine you're Steve Cohen. You have given Scott Boras a cut of $765 million. You went to an insane degree to get him that player or get him that contract for his player. And now, because of that contract, you are going to perpetually be in the luxury tax forever, for 15 years, really. If you want to build a good team around Juan Soto, you're always going to be in the tax, and that's fine. But he's saying, really? What if the Mets met the total dollar amount to a T? To a T. Let's even say Scott Boras wanted $95 million for Pete Alonso over 3 years. And Mets said, fine. We'll do that. We'll do the opt-outs. But we're going to have to defer $50 million or however much you have to defer to get it in the price range they wanted. And they're saying, no. Steve's like, I'm meeting your price. But I am trying to do the Dodgers thing where I don't have to pay 110 cents on the dollar for all this money. And Boras is saying, no, that's not how these contracts work. That's got to be so frustrating. And that's where you get to Steve and David Stern saying, we're done. Screw this. We're pulling our offer. You go find something better. And that's why we are where we are. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the next chapter of this story is, although I know everyone's pretty sick of it. And this week, as we get into our episodes, I am going to try my best, which I can't really promise anymore. It's broken promises. When we get something as juicy as this, we got to talk about it. I'm sorry, but I do want to start to talk more and more about this current team. We've already started to discuss the young players who can fill that position. You can go back, check out that episode. I want to spend some time on Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo because those guys are going to have to step up. They have to fill in for a lot of production that's potentially leaving from a homegrown Met. Those guys are homegrown Mets that are still here, that are veterans, that are not at the same level of a Juan Soto or Francisco Lindor, but have had all-star caliber seasons in the past. McNeil has been an all-star. Nimmo has played to that level. They got to get back to that. They have to fill that void. So I'm going to talk about those guys this week. We're going to continue to look more towards the 2025 season. I also want to talk some about how incredible the duo of Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor is going to be. So a lot to look forward to. If you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of those episodes and you're listening to the audio side today, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 13,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who have already subscribed. If you want to be a Locked On Mets Insider, find a link in the episode description. You can follow me on social media, Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with the local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league, by Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.